Okay, so let's get started and let's try what I just told you in practice. So I invite you to follow along and to create a new minimal web API. In my case, I will call it Hello Swagger, but you can call it whatever you want. It will just be our Hello World application for Swagger. This is what we are going to focus on today. And tomorrow we are going to build a larger, more meaningful example. Okay? .NET New Web, please do so. That will create a new minimal web API. And then we will load it in Visual Studio Code, as we're used to. Let's put it here. Oh, because of a presentation I did, I am in light theme. Let's switch to dark theme. I think that's better, right? Or do you prefer light? What's better to read here? Dark or light?
Light.
Light? Then let's keep it with light. Good. If you take a look at this application, then this is a typical minimal API, just like we have discussed it a lot of times so far. Please give it a try and copy this, copy this line 2 times and maybe add a, I don't know, ping endpoint and a king endpoint. And in one case you say, I don't know, ping pong, and here you say king kong, just to have 3 endpoints. It doesn't matter what endpoints we have. Now let's run this guy. I press F5. It will compile our minimal API. Please do the same. It will essentially open up a browser and I can say no URL says hello world. If I say ping, it says pong. And if I say king, it says kong. So that looks really nice. It works very well. But imagine if you give this API to anybody else, does this user of your API know which endpoints there are? Well, obviously not. That's the first important aspect of Open API Specification. If you want to communicate to an end user which endpoints you have, you need to somehow write that down. And this can be done manually or, in our case, with Open API Specification with Swagger. In order to use Swagger, we need a NuGet package. This NuGet package that we are going to use in this course is called Swashbuckle. Let me show you how that looks like. You can Google it, Swashbuckle. Do you know what Swashbuckler means? In German, it's the Prahlhans. Hey, look at me, look what I can do. And this is exactly what Swagger does. The API says, hey, come on, this is what I can do. This is what I would like to show you what I'm able to do. And Swashbuckler is, it's the English name. So here you see Swashbuckle ASP.NET Core. It's the Swagger tools for documenting APIs built on ASP.NET Core. This is exactly the library that we are going to use. Now, please note that this is not the only library that does exactly that things that I'm going to show you. There are alternative NuGet packages too, but this is the package that I am going to use in this course. Here you see the current versions of this specification. The current version of Open API Specification is 3.0. They renamed this standard from Swagger to Open API when they switched from version 2 to version 3. And we are going to look at version 3 of Swagger or Open API Specification. Good. Now if we scroll down, we will see that if we install this thing, we have to install swashbuckle.asp.NET Core. In fact, we are now using .NET 7. We have to install 2 NuGet packages. And I'm going to show you how we do that. Question: do you already have the NuGet Package Explorer installed? You can check that by going to the extensions and look for NuGet and you should see the NuGet, I think it's the NuGet Package Explorer. Let me see. Sorry, this is the right one. I want you to have a user interface, a graphical user interface for that. The NuGet Package Manager GUI. Okay, it's easier to install all these things. You can do it in a command line too, but let's use the GUI. Okay, so let's install the NuGet Package Manager GUI. Once you have that, you can press F1 to get the commands here and just say NuGet and launch the NuGet Package Manager GUI. You see? Looks like that. Now we can install a new package, and the package that we want to install is swashbuckle.aspnetcore. You can click on search, and it should give you swashbuckle.aspnetcore. This is exactly what we want to have. The current version is 6.5. That's fine. Let's click on install. Once you do that, you get a question in Visual Studio Code that there are unresolved dependencies. Do you want to run a restore? Restore means the system will automatically fetch the NuGet package from the internet and install it onto your computer. And that's exactly what we want to do. So please click on restore. That should be finished within a few seconds, even on the school internet here. Technically, what happened is that the system added, see it here, is what? An entry which is called item group with a package reference swashbuckle.asp.NET Core. This is important for your upcoming exam. I am definitely going to ask you add a Swagger documentation. And you have to know that you need to install a NuGet package, and you have to know that this NuGet package is called a swashbuckle.asp.NET Core. You can use all the material. So you can look it simply up in this example that we do together now. Okay? So it's really not complicated. The second package that we are going to install is a package that comes from Microsoft, and that gives us additional possibilities when it comes to documenting our API. This one is called Microsoft.aspnetcore.Open API. Click on search. It will show you exactly this NuGet package. Here it is. It's in version 7.03. That's okay. Click on install. Click on restore. Done. Now we have two dependencies in our CS_proj file. These are the two NuGet packages that you need. So it's really simple to do that in Visual Studio Code. I guess, if I can remember correctly, you have used Visual Studio before, right? It's very similar to what you see here, right? You just click on right-click, manage NuGet packages, and then you select what NuGet packages that you want to have. In Visual Studio Code, it's also very simple. Good. Nice. So now let's add the necessary services. Please go into the program.cs, and in the program.cs we need to add, I think it is 4 lines or something like this. Let me show you. First is builder.services.add_endpoints_API Explorer. That's the first one. And the second is builder.services.add_swagger_gen. That's the second one. These two things are simply adding the necessary prerequisites for Open API specification to work. Next, we are going to, before the map.get, we're going to say app.useSwagger and app.useSwagger_UI. These are the 4 lines that you need to add. Don't get me wrong, in practice, this is a little bit more complicated if you are developing a real solution. not just a sample, because of course there is a million different ways of configuring this stuff, and I'm going to show you how this is done, right? Let's give it a try. Let's run it again. And let's see if something changed. First, let's see if I screwed up. Okay, it still says hello world, but now comes the important part. I'm now saying /swagger. See that one? And guess what? We have a documentation. We are now a swashbuckler. See what I can do. See? Now I can simply say /swagger, and it shows me that there is a ping endpoint. And there is a king endpoint. And if I take a look at the ping endpoint, it will also tell me that I'm going to get back a plain text of type string. So we already have a little bit of documentation. This is for the human. And please take a close look at what we have here. This is the JSON file of which I was talking. So if I run this JSON, if I follow this link, I will get the JSON representation of the documentation. This is now machine readable. It contains all the necessary information for a machine to generate the client library. Got it? Want to see such a generator, how it looks like? For instance, one is the Azure Auto REST generator. This one, this generator here, Azure/Auto REST, is for instance a generator which is rather active. As you can see, 2 weeks ago was the last check-in, 5,600 commits, and it supports generating clients in C#, PowerShell, Go, Java, Node, TypeScript, and Python. This is for instance the source generator that Microsoft uses to generate their Azure clients. As I told you, this is just for your interest. We will not use that in this course. Not yet. But now you have the whole picture. You see how it works. And if you need it, for instance, for your final year project or your SIP projects, you can use it if you want. Make sense? Yep? Good. So let's start by configuring this stuff, at least a little bit. When we go here in this add swagger gen, you see that here, what we can do is we can specify a lambda function here. We can say options, fat arrow, and then we add a code block, and then we can say options dot, and then you see a lot of configuration stuff. See? A lot of different configuration options that we have here. I will not show you all the things which are possible here. Maybe tomorrow we will take a little bit of a look here, but please read the documentation if you really want to change something. For instance, this one is a method with which you can give your API a title and a version number. You can try that if you want. Options.swagger.doc, a version number with a title, and in this case the version is the same. We can also say 1.0.0, whatever you like. Now if you run it, let's remember this my API. If you run it, and if you open it up in the browser, you say /swagger, you will see that this now says my API, and we see that it says version 1. See? So you can configure the user interface, and of course that also changes the JSON file. You see? You can add a copyright message. You can add some descriptive stuff. That's important. If you are a service provider and you want to be nice to your customers, you would like to add a little bit of text and descriptive information. And this is exactly what you do here. Can everybody follow along? Does that work as expected? Yes? Good. Very nice. Next step. Let's add a sample endpoint. It will not do anything useful. It's just for showing off the documentation. And this endpoint is now using another method, not a get endpoint, but a post endpoint, okay? Please create a record. Let's call it person with name and age. I think that is okay. And then we add a post endpoint, map post, where we say something like, I don't know, slash people. Okay, it gets a person, and we don't need an implementation now. We simply say throw new not implemented exception. We are not interested in the details here. We simply say, sorry, I forgot the curly braces here. I'm sorry. Now it's okay. We are not interested in the implementation. You have already seen how we can implement such methods. For now, we are just interested in how this is documented, okay? So just create a record and create a post endpoint as you see it here. And run it again. Let's see how this changes our Swagger information. Let's take a look at the Swagger UI. And you see, we now have a post endpoint. See it here? And the important thing here is that the system automatically has recognized that there is a required request body. It also recognized the schema information of our record person. See? So it read the C# code, and the C# code is automatically translated into JSON, and our Swagger file gives a user nice information that this API requires a name and an age. Makes sense, doesn't it? If we scroll down a little bit, we also see that we have a summary of all the different data types, in this case person. And if I take a look at that one, you see the name is nullable and the age is an integer in this case. So this system gives you really a lot of useful information. Let's take a quick look at what we had to do for that. The short answer is nothing. We simply get it for free. All we need to do is we need to add these 4 lines of code, and then we write the code, and everything is okay. You might take that for granted. You might think, okay, so what's the point? It's really simple. It does everything I want for me. Consider yourself lucky. In other programming languages, such libraries don't exist. Try to use Node.js, for instance, and implement your web API using Node.js. Try to generate such a Swagger file from Node.js. Does it work? No, it doesn't. Why? Because JavaScript doesn't have types. In JavaScript, we simply don't have something like a record. We are dynamically typed. It doesn't work. Well, there are workarounds and helper libraries and so on and blah, blah, but you will never get something as convenient as that. You know how that works in Node.js? I can tell you how that works. You manually fire up an editor and you write exactly that JSON or the WAML representation by hand. Have fun. I did that. I've written thousands of lines of Open API specification in my career. Because, of course, you can also write this by hand. Imagine that you have C# and you have this capability of generating this file. Why would anybody who is sane write something like this by hand? Can you come up with any reason why I did that? The reason is simple. I did it before we implemented the API. Swagger and Open API specification is not just a standard to document APIs. It's also a standard for specifying APIs. Imagine that I have a supplier who does the programming for me, and I would like to give this supplier a specification what I expect him to write, then there is no generator because there is no code yet. And then I go, for instance, to swagger.com, IO, sorry. I click on sign in. I log in with my GitHub account. Here we are. And I am, here we are. There is some, yeah, here we have something like this. And then I can use this IDE, let's put it that way, where I write on the left-hand side the Open API by hand. I've written all this stuff by hand before I wrote the code. So then I see on the right-hand side the written specification of what there is to do. And then I can give this specification to my developers. And then they know exactly which API to build. Understand what I mean? It's like when you build a house. When you build a house and you are an architect, you draw a design of the house. You draw a floor plan and things like that. But wouldn't it be nice, once the house is done, that you have some magic robot that drives through the house and generates an always up-to-date floor plan for you? Such robots exist, of course. You can buy them today and you can rent some of these robots. And that is exactly what we have here. The architect is the one, before the house is built, who draws something like this, who writes the specification. Then somebody builds the house, and of course, the house does not match the floor plan of the architect 100%. If you don't believe me, build a house. You are lucky if the house looks 90% like the original plan. You are lucky. In many cases, the walls are not exactly where they should be. And it's the same with coding here. This is the specification, and the developers, well, they tend to not always read the specification fully. They just write a little bit of code which is not doing exactly what it's supposed to do. And then it makes sense to have something like this, where you can auto-generate the necessary API specification afterwards. Understand what I mean? First you write it by hand, and then you generate the documentation, and this generated documentation is documenting the real world, not the original plan. Do you understand how this works together? So if you do your final year projects in the upcoming months, and you're not already done with your code, it's a good idea, if you need to implement an API, for instance, that you sit down, you log in to Swagger Hub, create a free account, and then you specify the API by hand in Open API Specification. That will be very useful. Got it? It might happen that in the next exam, I might give you something like that, a specification in Swagger. And I tell you, write code that implements exactly the specification in the Swagger file. It's a really good tip. It's very likely that something like this will happen. So you need to at least be able to read this. Are we good? I hope we are. Now, if you go to the Swagger Hub tooling, you can also see directly here in the user interface generate a lot of different clients, see, here directly through the UI. If I take a look at the client SDK, you see there are a lot of different client SDKs, and here you can also generate the TypeScript Angular client. So I can click on that, and what I will get is the generated code. And as I told you, we'll not take a close look at the generated code, but this is essentially what you have to do. It generates the client for you. You can do it in the UI. You don't even need to use a command line tool. This is exactly what I wanted to show you in the first hour. Now you have the big picture. Now we will make a 5-minute break, and after this break we will dive a little bit deeper. What can we do to rename things? How do we document status codes, for instance? How can we document query string parameters and so on? We will take a little bit of time to dive deeper into how we can configure Swagger. That is our goal today. And tomorrow you will have the possibility to practice exactly that on your own API. Okay? Good. 5 minutes break.